Alright, hey guys, welcome to another tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to do the air assassination script that I showed. So I'm going to just go ahead and do a preview of it here real fast. So we have a log in the back corner there that shows you how much health you have. Then let's go ahead and assassinate this guy. We assassinated him. Hardcore. So he's dead. And basically how it works, the initial setup here, we have 4 path nodes, and in these path nodes, basically in Kismet, we just tell the bot that spawns just to go in a circle, waiting a second between each time they go. And then there's also a trigger volume that's created and attached to the enemy just above his head. And what happens is if the player does touch that trigger volume, we go ahead and get the player's Z velocity because he's coming down. And if the Z velocity is fast enough and the player does touch that volume there, it'll kill the enemy, and you won't get any damage from the fall, basically. So let me show you when you miss, because nothing really happens when you miss, but you can miss. So you miss, yeah, damage dealt. He's not dead yet. So let's go ahead and try to kill him again. And we got him. So let me show you this in Kismet, what it looks like. Kind of a lot, but we'll break it down here. So we have a handful of variables here. I'll explain those when we create them. This one right here just puts us in third person, and it shows the volumes. These are just console commands that we can use, just so we know where the dynamic trigger volume is and everything like that. And here's the AI logic. When the level spawned, we basically have the UTA factory AI, actor factory for here. And then we spawn at one of the path nodes, and then we put that enemy into an object variable. We add them to a modified list for our object list of enemies if there's more than one. Right now there's only one, so that doesn't really matter, but past that we also attach the dynamic trigger volume to the enemy, and then we also attach to the enemy the death event. So whenever this enemy dies, he'll get removed from the list. But from there, once the enemy is added to the list, we go ahead and this is where we tell the AI to move from one path node to the other. So he moves to the first one, to the second one, to the third one, to the fourth one, and back, and it loops until obviously they die. So that's the AI logic. Nothing too special, nothing nuts for that. But this is where we go ahead and do the majority of the logic for when we want to go ahead and assassinate them. Right now it is just a matter of just landing on them, going at a certain velocity. So let me show you here. So when the dynamic trigger volume is touched, we get the velocity of whoever is touching it, and we put it into a vector, and then we get the vector components because we only want the Z velocity. So we got the player's Z speed, but then we multiply the speed by -1. The only reason for that is because when you're falling down, your speed's negative. So I just multiplied by -1 to make it a positive value, just so when you compare it, it doesn't get too confusing. So basically, after that logic, say our speed and our Z velocity is like -100. We multiply that by -1, which makes it 100, and then we compare that result to however fast you want the player to be going at the time. I found that 1,000 is a good number. So basically, if they're going faster, or if they're going 1,000 or faster in terms of their speed on the velocity, we go ahead and modify the health of the enemy. So basically, we modify it to the point where they'll die. And then we just store that dynamic trigger volume that's attached to them. And at the same time, what we do, we get the health property of the player. And then basically, because no matter what, you're going to lose health when falling from that distance. But it's here, when you actually successfully land on the enemy and kill them, where we get the player's health, we compare if it's lower than 100, and if it is, we heal them. And if for any reason when we heal them it gets over 100, we go ahead and set player health to 100. And then at this point, this is just our debug logic just to keep track of some variables. But past that, that's really it. So let's go ahead, start from scratch. And I'm only going to start from scratch in terms of the Kismet logic. I'm not going to start this environment from scratch. All it is just blocks. 2 of them are higher than the other 2, and then we just have, you know, some spaces for cover, things like that. But then we also have jump pads that bring you from one place to another. So I'll show you that. So that's basically, you can just jump from one place to another. Nothing too special. But one thing we gotta mention here, we gotta make sure we're on UT game for the game type, for the default game type in PIE. That just allows you to use Kismet and everything properly, and you won't run into any issues. But past that, we also gotta give no default inventory for the player, and that's just because, you know, we don't want the player to have any weapons or anything like that. Not even a physics gun. They're just gonna be bare. They're not gonna have anything. And then past that, the one thing we need to make sure we create is our dynamic trigger volume. All you need to do is take your builder brush. I made it 64 by 64 by 64. But once you have that, it doesn't matter where this is located in your environment. It'll just attach to the enemy when you do it in Kismet. So you just go to volumes, go all the way up to dynamic trigger volume. And the reason why we're making it dynamic is because it's being attached to an enemy that's moving. So only objects that are dynamic are able to be moved like that. So if you just use a trigger volume, you're going to run into problems. So go ahead. Now we have our environment set up. Let's go ahead and go into Kismet. First thing we're going to do is just give ourselves a third-person camera. So let's go to new event, level loaded, and then new action, MISC, and then it's under console command. And then target, let's hold down the P key, left click on target, gives us all players. But from there, we're going to go ahead and uncheck all players just to make it us, player 0. And then we're going to add a second command on our command list. The first command is just going to be behind the view. That's the third-person camera. But then that second one's going to be show volumes. That's going to allow us to see the volumes in the environment. So let's go ahead and play. And as you can see, there's our volume, there's our white man's volume, there's our dynamic trigger volume. So we know that's working, and we're in third person. And you can see those weird hands. So we know that's working. Overall, that's fine. So next we're going to make our variable list. Let me first put this in a comment here. So let's go ahead and work on our variables. The first one's going to be an empty object variable. So let's go to new variable, object, and object. We're going to name this enemy. This will just have a variable to keep the enemy who's spawned in. Just makes it cleaner and it allows you to have more flexibility in terms of, you know, what it is you want to do with these enemies, if you want to have more than one, things like that. So the next one we're going to make is an object list for this enemy. So it's right click, new variable, object, object list. We're going to name this list enemy list. Then the next variable we're going to need is just a way to track the number of the enemies if you ever want to use it. It's going to be an integer variable, so you go to new variable, int, and then just int, name this number of enemies. And then the next one is going to be a float variable. So with new variable, float, and then just float. This one's actually going to track the player's speed in the z-axis, so up and down. So let's name this player z speed. Next, we're going to need a vector variable. So let's go to new variable, vector. So this will track the x, y, and z speed of the player whenever they touch the trigger volume. So we're just going to name this player speed vector. And then the last one we need is just an integer for the player's health. So let's go to new variable, int, and just name this player health, something along those lines. So that's all the variables we need, so let's just grab all of them, make a comment, call them variables. Okay, and let's just move them in his position, that's good. Perfect. So now it's time to get into the meat of things. So what we want to do is first spawn the enemy AI. So let's just copy and paste our level loaded event. And as soon as the level's loaded, just for this instance, we're going to go ahead and spawn an enemy. So let's go to new action, actor factory. Whoops, wrong one. And just plug into spawn actor. And then with the actual actor selected, there's a bunch of different things we have to do in the actual node. First off, we got to go hit this blue arrow. Let's go to Actor Factory AI. Then under controller class, we're going to do UT bot. And then pawn class, we're going to do UT pawn. Pawn name, you don't really have to give it anything, but we can do it. I'll just name it myself, so we can kill me every single time we assassinate them. Past that, we don't want to give default inventory just because we don't want this enemy shooting at us for any reason. That's not really necessary. And then past that, that's all we really need to have here for this guy. That's the only changes we need to make. But next thing, we need to give him a spawn point. So we're just going to grab one of these path nodes. With that selected, let's just right-click on spawn point and do new object var using path node 6. And then for spawn, we're going to use a name variable for that enemy variable we created earlier. So let's right-click, new variable, named variable, make it an object, and the name is enemy. And we're going to plug that in. So that's all we need to actually spawn an enemy. So let's see if that's working. And it is. Hey, buddy. How you doing? So we know that's working, which is great. So let's go back into Kismet. And what we're going to do next is just add them to our enemy list, just in case you ever want to have multiple enemies and want to keep track of all of them. I'll show you how to do it. So let's go to New Action, Object List, Modify Object List. So basically when we spawn this enemy, we want to add them to that enemy list we created. The object reference is going to be enemy. Now let's copy and paste this one name variable. Let's change its expected type to object list and just change the name from enemy to enemy list. Plug that in. And then for list entries count, this is going to count how many enemies are in this list. Let's copy and paste that. Let's make the expected type an integer and rename this number of enemies. Plug that in. So now we have everything getting tracked. And then at this point, we want to go ahead and do a couple things. First, we're going to attach the dynamic trigger volume we made. So let's go to New Action, Actor, then Attach to Actor. From Finished, do Attach to Actor. So the target is going to be the enemy. And the attachment is going to be the dynamic trigger volume. So let's find that in the environment. With that selected, let's go ahead and right-click on attachment and then do new object var using dynamic trigger volume _1. But in the actual properties of the attached actor, we got to do one thing. I found that it's easiest for the actual positioning to use relative offset. And only in the z-axis, we're going to make this 70. I found that was the best height to use. So it's 70 units from the ground, and that's a little bit over the player's head. So that's always a good thing. But let's go ahead and just see if that's working. So let's go ahead and play, and it is. We see that that trigger volume is attached. It's a little bit above their head, so we know that's working, so that's good. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to attach a death event to this enemy. So let's go to New Action, Actor. Now it's actually under Event, and then Attach to Event. So our attachee is the enemy. And in the actual event, it's going to be a death event. So if we go to New Event, I believe that's our pawn, and then Death. And then every time the enemy dies, what do we want to do? We want to remove that enemy from our object list. So let's go ahead and copy this whole section, and then plug that into Remove from List. And then let's also attach enemy to the instigator, and you're set. But now we're just going to give this AI some logic. It's very simple logic. He's going to move from one path node to the next. So let's go to New Action, AI, move to Actor. Our target is going to be enemy. And then the first destination, I believe we're starting on this one, which is 6. Yeah. So the first destination is going to be this one right here. So we'll right-click, add that to destination. And then once it's finished, we're going to do a delay of about 2 seconds, and then we're going to move to the next actor. And the next actor is going to be this path node right here. So let's just right click, update this variable. And then we're going to do this again. And then we're going to update it with this path node. And then we're going to do it one last time with the very beginning path node. Now let's go ahead and update that. And then we're just going to loop it back. Just so now the enemy's going to walk basically in a kind of a circle. So let's just see if that's working. Alright, now we see that's working. That's awesome. So let's go ahead and just grab this whole thing. Just comment. I'm going to put AI logic just so I know what it is. Let's just move that in a good position here. Awesome. So the last thing we really need to do is the assassination part. Basically when we touch that trigger volume. So honestly, the first thing we need is the trigger volume itself selected. And then in Kismet, let me open this up all the way. The very first thing is going to be a touch event. So let's do a new event using dynamic trigger volume, and then make it a touch. And the only thing we need to do and change with this is set the max trigger count from 1 to 0, just so that can fire an infinite amount of times. And then we're going to have just a quick voice announcement, just so we know when we touch it. I'm going to make this voice announcement say hit. We're going to plug that in. Just going to put this upwards so it doesn't really get in the way of anything. But now, whenever we touch that trigger volume, this is where we want to get the velocity of the player. So let's right click, new action, actor, get velocity. And basically, we're going to have the target is going to be the player. So let's hold down the P key, left click, and then uncheck all players. And then basically all we need to do at this point is put the variable in for our velocity vector. So let's go ahead and copy a named variable. Change it to vector. And I believe we named this player speed vector. So plug that in. And so at this point, we're getting the vector speed of the player. So this means we're getting the speed in the X, the Y, and the Z. But at this point, we only want the Z. So we're going to get the actual component here. So let's go to new action. Math, get vector components, and ask for a vector, so that's going to be our player speed vector, and then it's going to output each individual one into a float. Since we have a variable for our Z speed, let's just copy and paste the named variable, change it to a float type. I believe we just named this player Z speed, plug that into the Z. So now we're getting the player Z speed every time we touch it. So let's go ahead and just log that, see if it's working. Okay. Let's go ahead and play. We're going to take damage though, but we're going to see. And right there in the corner, that's our negative Z speed. So we know that's working so far, so that's great. And as you saw, it was a negative value. It was about negative 1400 or so. So let me go ahead and just disconnect this log, put it down here. So since it was negative, we want to go ahead and just make it a positive number, just so when we compare it, it makes the things easier, because comparing two negatives does get confusing. So let's go to new action, math, multiplied float, plug that right in. So we're basically going to be multiplying our player Z speed by -1, because anything a negative times a negative it makes it a positive. And by making it -1, we're basically getting the positive version of that number. And then that float result we're going to put back into the z-speed. So basically, we're making the z-speed equal to itself times -1 in this section. So now that we have a positive number, it's going to make things easier to compare. So let's go ahead and compare floats. Let's go to New Condition, Comparison, Compare Float. Plug that in. Honestly, the first thing we're going to compare is the player's z-speed. The second float we're going to compare is just the -1000, just because it's a high number that the player can only reach at a certain height. This was done through play testing and things like that. But you guys can use any number you want. But at this point, what we got to do, if the player's z-speed is greater than or equal to 1000, that's when we want to go ahead and kill the enemy. So that's what we're going to set up now. Let's go to New Action, Actor, Modify Health, plug that in. So our target is going to be the enemy. And then in the Modify Health property, this is what we're going to do. We're going to leave momentum alone. We're going to do damage type crushed. And then the amount, just to ensure that we are killing an enemy, we're going to make it 200. Instead of just 100, we're going to make it 200 just to guarantee that they're going to die. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and destroy the dynamic trigger volume that's attached to the enemy. So let's go to New Action, Actor, and then Destroy. Plug that in. And then the target, like I said, it's going to be our dynamic trigger volume. So let's get that object variable, plug that right in. So the last thing we really need to do is the health aspect, but let me just make sure that this is working. Let's go over here. So there's our enemy. And Devin. Devin killed himself. But we know that's working. So that's awesome. So that's basically the full brunt of it, but I'll show you how to go ahead and just modify your health as well. So the first thing we need to do is get the health property from the player. So let's go to New Action, Object Property, Get Property. Plug that in. The target is going to be the player, so let's grab a player 0 variable. And then the player health property is an integer, that's why we created that player health variable. So let's go ahead and copy and paste the named variable, change its expected type to int, and change the name to player health. Put that in. And so now every time we kill the enemy, we go ahead and get the health of the player. But now we need to go ahead and compare that health to, the full on health, which is 100%. So let's go to New Condition, Compare, Compare Int, plug that right in. Put in player health for A, and then for output B, let's create a new variable, make that value 100. And so basically, if A, for any reason, player health, if that's ever less than 100, we're going to go ahead and heal the player. So let's grab another Modify Health. Let me just copy and paste this guy. So if A is ever less than B, we gotta go ahead and heal the player. So let's grab a player 0 variable, and then under the Modify Health, damage type none, amount let's just do by 100, and then we gotta make sure we check the box that says heal. This will add health to the player instead of taking it away. And then what we want to go ahead and do is set a delay of about 0.1 seconds. And we're going to plug this part back into the compare, just in case we need to get more health or anything like that. But then also, if A is ever greater than B, so when we heal him, if it's ever over 100, we want to go ahead and set the player's health to 100 just so it doesn't get above it. So let's go to New Action, Set Variable, Int, and then A is greater than B. Our target's going to be player health, and the value is going to be 100, so let's just copy and paste this 100. And then this doesn't need to get looped back or anything like that. But we also do need to do another loop under the get property. We're going to do a 0.1 second delay and plug it back into itself. It's just so it's constantly getting the health property, so we know exactly where it is in terms of its value. So let's go ahead and double check to see if that's working. And it is. We never lost any health. So let's double check to make sure it's working by just falling and seeing if we get damage taken to us. Okay, so we see that it's actually healing us no matter what, which is definitely strange. That's not something we need to have happen here. So but that's only when that thing is touched. That's strange. Shouldn't then we destroy that? So let's try that again. It shouldn't heal us. I'm wondering why. Okay, so it doesn't heal us. Does that dynamic trigger volume get destroyed properly? Oh! Oopsies. Let's try that again. I missed. Well, this one's hard to test. Okay. Okay, so the trigger volume is gone. So now it's still healing. I think I know what needs to be done here. Let's go into our Kismet logic. Let's go ahead and get a new action, toggle, and then just a normal toggle. And basically when we destroy the dynamic trigger volume, we're going to go ahead and turn off this overall event, so it can't be activated again. Let's see if that changes anything. Did I really just miss him? No! Whee! Okay, let's try it again. Alright, now he's dead. Just see if we get damage. Still healing us. I think I know why. Has to be the loop. It's this loop here that's causing that to happen. Let's try this again. Gimme. This one's so hard to get. Alright, now that he's dead, let's see if we keep getting healed. We are still getting healed, so it has to be this delay. Alright, now it will only do it once. Go ahead and test that theory. I've been doing this actually on the wrong screen here. Do that delay. So now there's no more delays and no more loops feedback going on right there. So let's try this one more time. Alright, so he's dead. Pretty brutal. Alright, now we're getting damage taken again. Okay. So it's basically these loops in this section here. So we took those away. So let's go ahead and comment this section. Just name this Assassination Logic. And that's our debug log. Whoops. Just name that debug. And that's everything. So we basically did everything from scratch. Okay, so just to break it down again, we have, whenever we load up the level, we go into third person, and we show the show volumes, just so we know where the dynamic trigger volume is. And then from there, when the level's loaded, we create an enemy, we attach a dynamic trigger volume to the enemy, and set its position a little bit above their head. We also add that enemy to our enemy list, and attach to that enemy the death event that, when upon death, will remove them from the enemy list. But from there, we just tell that enemy to move from one path node to the next with about 2 seconds in between. So they move from one to the next, and they keep doing that until they die. But from there, whenever that dynamic trigger volume is touched by the player, the one above the enemy's head, we get their velocity, we put that velocity in a vector, we get the z component of that vector, because we're falling down, you know, that's the z-axis. And then since the z-axis is going to be negative on its way down, we multiply that value by -1, just so we can make the comparison easier. So basically then we compare that z value to the number 1,000, just based off play testing. That's the best one I found. And if it is greater than or equal to 1,000, we go ahead and modify the enemy's health by killing them. We destroy that dynamic trigger volume, and we go ahead and turn off the dynamic trigger volume touch event. And also at the same time, once the enemy's dead, we get the player's health property. We check to see if it's lower than or equal to, actually just lower than 100, and if it is, we heal them. But if that is ever higher than 100, we go ahead and just set it to 100, just so the player's health never goes higher than 100. So that's everything. That's how you do this assassination script. Let me know what you think. Honestly, it's not a full-on concept. It's just something I wanted to do that was interesting. Someone asked me to do it as well. They were curious about it. So that's my interpretation of it. So just let me know, what you guys thought, if you have any questions on it, or anything like that. So that's this tutorial. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.